when you're in a hospital bed and a couple of doctors walk in their white coats and say, sorry, we thought this was a typical kind of sports industry and injury and so on, but it turns out like you have a very large form, synovial sarcoma. It's rare. It's invariably terminal. You can expect to have 18 to 36 months of life left, and what happens in that moment is I became, maybe not exactly in that moment, but the moments that followed it, I became aware of, we all say, you ask someone on the street, do you know someday you're going to die? They'll say, yes, of course, everyone dies. But it's just a conceptual understanding. It isn't an experiential understanding, a knowing, right?
This is Heal Your Part, and I'm Jennifer Herrera. I'm on a mission to help you heal what's in the way so you can see yourself the way your soul does. Because when you heal your part, everything shifts. Welcome back to the Heal Your Part podcast. I'm Jennifer Herrera, your host. Today, I'm thrilled to share a conversation with Kirk Souder. Kirk's a seasoned creative industry leader and an executive coach who works with high-impact leaders all over the world to help them deepen their own purpose, expand their leadership, and inevitably increase and expand their impact. I love this conversation. I'm very fond of Kirk. He is a mentor to me, and I feel like every time we get to have a conversation, it's like a mini masterclass. In this episode, we talk about the turning points that shaped his path, including an early cancer diagnosis when he was just going into his undergraduate education, and how that experience shifted his choices and then ultimately shifted the entire trajectory of his career and what he ended up pursuing to study, and then informing some of his major accomplishments that led him to create a beautiful life. And then at one point, he found that he was ready for something new and didn't quite know what that was. He happened upon an education in spiritual psychology, and that became his before and after moment for his life. I experienced Kirk as like a modern bodhisattva. He has a very calm nature about him, extremely humble, and has a lot of wisdom to share. If you're a leader, a creative, or anyone wanting to live and work with more intention, I think you'll find a lot here to sit with and receive and reflect on. So let's get into it. All right. Hello and welcome, Kirk Souder, to the Heal Your Part
Hi, Jennifer.
podcast.
It's great to be here. I've always been a big admirer of yours, so it's good to be present here today.
Well, likewise, I'm just thrilled to really be able to sit here and have this dialogue with you. It's been a dream come true and a long time coming. Well, I just want to start by asking you to share with myself and obviously with the listener, like just your background and anything that's present for you to share around how you became you today. And we'll kind of go from there.
Great. Yeah. So as you know, today I'm I guess what we'll call a transformative executive coach. I work with executives and leaders and creators and helping them achieve a new level of creation for them. But how I got here was my original career was in the creative parts of marketing and branding and advertising. And I came up as a creative director in that world, eventually started a couple of companies in that space and had some success. And then, eventually became president and chief creative officer of a larger agency called Publicis West. And about 2 years into that experience, I had reached a place where it was like, okay, is this all there is? Like this is where I'd hoped to arrive someday. I had won the awards and all that jazz. And I started to ask bigger questions, and I was on my way to work one day, and for the first time I experienced dread going into work. And I that was the first kind of feedback from my universe to me that something really wasn't happening, and or something, the same thing had been happening. It was time for something new to happen. And at the time I was a peer-to-peer counselor for numerous hospitals for people who had cancer because I'm a survivor, and I managed to survive a very rare form of cancer called synovial sarcoma that I was told on two occasions was terminal for me when I was in my early 20s. And so I was on call to these hospitals, the day I was feeling that dread profoundly, and I started to open up to what this means. I arrive at my office, the phone in my office is ringing back when there were offices and phones in them. And on the phone is an 18-year-old teenage guy who essentially was me back then, and scared, and just needed to hear a voice of someone who had survived. When I put down the phone after an hour, I realized that I in that hour had experienced the aliveness again that I hadn't been experiencing in a long time, and that it had punctuated my experience then of non-aliveness, of that dread, that sense of incompleteness. And so it started me on a journey where I then, managed to find this very transformational program that you participated in as well, the University of Santa Monica spiritual psychology program. And it was like a before and after moment for my life where, it brought me into such greater awareness of who I am, what reality is. And, I decided to, at that moment, to let go of the polarity. And this comes into a lot of the work I find I do with others in the zone, of the polarity of there's what I do for joy and purpose, and then there's what I do for a living, right? And we even can unconsciously hold those as those are a choice we have to make, which of those we're going to do. And through the principles and practices of spiritual psychology, I became aware that I was creating that polarity. And when I let go of that, within a matter of a few months, I found myself in Washington, D.C., working in this incredible agency that wasn't just it was called like an advertising and marketing agency, but it really was a group of activists who came together and said, we're just going to apply this craft to things that can change the world. And they were also the lead agency for Obama for America. And it was almost like my, personal kind of strategic brief for life had been, there it is. And I began to get real acquainted with the power of this work, of the power of intentionality and aligned action coming together, and the capacity of that to create amazing things for us in this world. And there it was. And to make a long story short, that ended up then me creating another company, which we called the First Impact Agency, an agency that used those same creative and strategic things that a marketing agency would, but for creating big activations in the world that could create positive impact, right? And I did that with my partner, with setting the context pretty early on that, like, while the agency is making those big activations, I want to be working one-on-one with leaders and helping kind of really liberate that creator inside to create meaningful change in the world, whether through these platforms they're in or others. So I started to do that, and then reached a place where, I wanted to be chips all in that and not managing a company. And so about 5 years ago, I fully leaned into what I'm doing now.
Wow. That's amazing. I haven't actually heard all of that. That's so cool. And I don't think I ever knew that you were a peer-to-peer counselor. Do you still do that?
Yeah, I do. It's still some of the most fulfilling work I do,
Yeah. Well, two things came forward I just wanted to reflect on. The first one was, I'm curious, in that kind of trajectory of your journey, and how you just kind of took us a little bit on a quick timeline of some significant moments in your life. I'm just curious if there was something that you remember learning or becoming aware of when you were young with this diagnosis and working through that became ignited or grew or expanded over time. I'm just curious, when you look back now with all this powerful and transformational work that you've been a part of, that you've led, that you've been a student of, I'm just curious if there's things back then that you heard and that you started to learn about yourself that are still true today.
Gosh, yeah, a couple come to mind. The one, first and foremost was when you're in a hospital bed and a couple of doctors walk in their white coats and say, sorry, we thought this was a typical kind of sports industry and injury and so on, but it turns out like you have a very large form, synovial sarcoma. It's rare. It's invariably terminal. You can expect to have 18 to 36 months of life left,
Mm.
and what happens in that moment is I became maybe not exactly in that moment, but the moments that followed it, I became aware of, we all say, you ask someone on the street, do you know someday you're going to die? They'll say, yes, of course, everyone dies. But it's just a conceptual understanding. It isn't an experiential understanding, a knowing, right? And I went into that difference. And then from, the experiential knowing of it, for me, as an absolute, I became very aware of just the finiteness of this experience and therefore the value of this experience. And, the liberating part in that for me is when one goes there, a lot of the things that would typically scare us, away from doing certain things and so on, that we might fail, that we might get rejected, start to really dissolve because it's like, what's the worst that can happen? I remember starting
Mm.
my first business, and I credit like cancer with giving me the gift of the freedom to do these things where a lot of people might not feel the freedom. Is I remember I was starting first company and someone, pulled me aside and said, "You sure you want to do that? You've got this kind of career going, it's going well. And, 80% of new businesses fail and 90% of startups in your area fail. And they were like had real concern for me, and like, and I'm looking at them and it was like, oh, like they don't get it, like they think those things are like bad, and I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen is I just end up back where I am now, and that's fine. But like, I get to try this, I get to have an experience of failure. Like,
Yeah.
some people don't get to have that experience, and whether because they pass on or whatever. So it's like
Mm.
any experience at that stage was a valuable experience to have.
Yeah.
Try a business and fail the first time, great. Like, that's okay. And I think that that liberation has served me well in my life, where, you know, I don't spend maybe as much time as some people might in the fear of what will be, what could be, and I think it's because of, the sniffing salts of mortality, make those things just seem not even real in a way. It's hard to describe, and the other thing from that experience was just that that's where I first became aware that there were bigger forces involved in reality than the ones that we had been taught that were the governing forces of reality. And that became a incredible journey to engage that and see what like co-creation with that means in this world. So those are the two big things I think that sustain to this day.
That's powerful. I love that. I think if I heard you accurately, you said something around death is the sniffing salts of death. What did you say? Can you say that again?
Oh, the sniffing salts of mortality,
Sniffing salts of
with
mortality.
regards to, how to live a full and vibrant life, I think.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's like I'm present to what you're sharing. I'm present to, the blessings in every experience, even in a terminal cancer diagnosis, right? And not to dig too deep here, but it just occurred to me, like obviously the purpose of this conversation, Heal Your Part, is to normalize and to talk about more, not just mental health and mental well-being, but really healing and And I feel like for some reason it's a significant part of the human experience. I mean, even when you're a kid and you scratch your knee, or I think every kid, like a lot of kids, have that cut under their chin. Yeah, we get stitches. Like, the body has to heal, and there's all these things that are always happening, but we're not really ever talking about them. And yet I think it's one of the most powerful parts of our own growth and evolution, and also a teacher. And it sounds like that experience, I don't know if you were thinking about it or became thinking about it that way back then, but you became, it sounds like, acquainted with the idea of healing at a very young age because of the cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. And my, present understanding of healing, which isn't so much that we're healing from something that happened to us, but we're healing towards something. And I think of healing as, we're really letting go of the illusions we've accumulated, the judgments and misinterpretations we've accumulated that seemingly keep us separate from that which we really are, the amazing creators we really are. And I think healing really is, it's not, the healing from trauma or healing from those things, to me, are actually where those things, even those things, can be harnessed of our true healing towards the awareness of what and who we really are.
Yeah. I so appreciate that perspective, that we have, that we can choose to see it and relate with it in that way. And that at least how I'm hearing it right now, it's like that becomes where the liberation starts, versus the contraction and fear, that the ego tends to hook into pretty quickly, our nervous system, etc., when we're shared something that we really don't want to hear. But it sounds like it's played a powerful part in your journey. And you started talking about your work and how your entrepreneurship, and then it sounds like being an owner in partnership, and maybe in your work with that happened to be with the Obama campaign. What a cool marker in history to be a part of. And how it sounds like there is when you started to really transition, or have the opportunity from that awareness of dread. Now you're in this situation of like, oh, I'm starting to now find my next chapter of like where I'm going to be, where I'm going to serve. And right.
Yeah. And how I'm going to serve.
I was just
Go
going to say,
ahead.
I would love for you to talk more about that, and how that kind of plays into when you talk about, when you mentioned in the beginning, like yourself as a transformative executive coach, and what does that really mean, and what can, and whatever you're willing to share. I know you obviously have some clients that you're not going to expose, but it's like whatever is present for you to share that can help the listener understand what does that mean and what's possible, especially if you're at a high ranking C-level role, where my experience of observation in all the roles I've been in is it becomes very kind of lonely, and the pressure, and how we relate with those kinds of positions, especially in public organizations. I mean, there's a whole range of pressure that can happen, but whatever's present, that's what I'm thinking of as I'm kind of reflecting on what you
Yeah.
shared.
Well, when I entered this area of work and vocation, I really, like, I had intentions of wanting to work with people who, David Brooks, the author, coined the term the second mountain or the second ascent, right?
Yeah.
And what he's referring to there is, and he describes as a phenomenon that's happening a lot now. And it's what it's about is that, when we enter life and we enter that part of our life that's about our vocation and our job and everything, and we kind of adopt this cultural conditioning of here's what we should do and be, and here's the path, and here's the salary markers, and here's the role markers, and here's the family markers, and all those markers. And essentially, and there's nothing wrong with this, it's the first ascent, which is we create from the conditioning of what we should be
Mm.
based on what our current cultural gestalt is telling us, right? And it's natural to do that. We make a false association that achieving it in that way gives us fulfillment and happiness, right? And so, you know, many people and executives and creators go ahead and do that, but then they get to that spot, and it's kind of like this beautifully wrapped gift box that they've been eyeing for a long time and climbing towards, and they get to it and they open it up to find it's maybe vaporous in there, like that, that the feelings of aliveness and fulfillment and excitement may or may not be present in that moment, depending on really, like, is what was the North Star just what they should be, or was it also what brings them alive to be on this world?
Mm.
And so, that's the first ascent. And then there's that moment where it's like, well, if this isn't it, then like, oh, and there's this new ascent, which they see, which is, what if I can do something, create something now that has all those same aspects of achievement and, whatever it is, but have real deep purpose and meaning and aliveness, like to do not what they should do, but really what they were put on the planet to do in a lot of ways, right? And so, I think because I had that experience, like I described to you, like of getting to that place and then saying, but there's something more, like there has to be something more. And then taking a new route, right? That's gotten me to a place that still has achievement and all those things in it, but I am brought alive every moment of every day in the work I do with people. And so I decided in the beginning to target that archetype in a way of who I was going to be working with, because it was kind of like, a Sherpa, the Sherpas who like get people to the top of Everest every year,
Yes.
have been to the top of Everest many times, and now they Sherpa people. And just like I had that experience, it's like, and I knew that there's tons of other people in the world who are having an identical experience. And what if I could be a Sherpa to help them on that journey in their second ascent in life? And so that's really what I've targeted, and that's the essence of what I do. I think is to, it's interesting. We've used two words today, Jennifer. I've noticed transformation and liberation,
Mm.
and I think what really is happening is that transformation itself is a little bit of it's a little inaccurate, because transformation implies I become something else, like help me become something else, right? Liberation, though, is really what's happening, which is that incredible creator, that alive being that's in touch, is already here. It's our true nature. And what this work really is doing is one by one, just cutting away the ballast that we've taken on in that world of doing what we should do, right? That
Yeah.
we can free up and then become like limitless creators that we were born to be. And so that's the fun part of this work, is that we are actually in the business of liberation more than transformation, and which to me is way more exciting to know that right now in everybody it's there already. Wow, what does that mean for our planet?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a powerful distinction. I'm even curious. Um, do you feel like, and maybe you had this experience, but do you feel like that distinction matters to the person that you could potentially be working with? Because what I was hearing and what you were sharing, at least how I was relating to it right now, is that, and it's always been interesting to me, because I don't feel like this is really a challenge, but it tends to be. I mean, that we have a whole, umbrella that's called change management, because apparently people really don't like to change, or they don't want change. And I feel like change is happening every day, like it's already happening. But I'm wondering is there kind of like oh, you're just going to help me become more of who I already am? Like, do people, when they begin work with you, I'm just curious, do they have that awareness of like, that's a relief, or do they even understand what that means? I'm just a little bit curious about that, how that could land with somebody who really hasn't had the opportunity yet to begin their second ascent.
It's a great question. I think sometimes they quickly become aware of that's what's really happening, and sometimes it's learned. I think we don't start off with the abstract ideas of that, right?
Mm.
It's more starting off grounding, and like what it's really about is we determine what they want to create. In the very beginning of the process, we embark on a series of kind of processes themselves where they get acquainted with what they really are brought alive to create on the planet. And that becomes, for lack of a better word, a North Star, a strategic brief for the work. Like, okay, that's now that you've given yourself permission to really connect and own that which really brings you alive. Like, even if it seems not a possibility, because part of the brief process is to go beyond what we think it might be possible, right? Just to free ourselves to go there. And so, at first it's like, okay, what is it that we want to create? Now let's start to create it. And invariably, when we start to create in this new direction, the only way to get there is to cut away these limiting beliefs we have that we adopted that created the first descent, right? So it starts to happen in an organic process, and they often then there's this lights go on one day in a session, and you go, oh, so wait a second, like I'm already that. I'm just now doing what I need to do to kind of let go of the ballast and the artifice that I thought was me, and now I see I'm this. Like, oh, now I see what's going on, and then there's that relief and extra excitement that it isn't like I have to try and like figure out what that new being I'm supposed to
Ah,
be is, and then how do I figure out how do some people get there and some people don't? Like, am I a lost cause in this? Because I might not be one of the ones, and it's like it's such a relief to say no. You're like, by your very nature and being here, you already have it. You already are it, right? So there's a relief and then an excitement because, like, oh, good. Like now it's just about, it's not a question mark. It's just about doing the work.
wow. That's powerful. That's exciting. And I even felt a sense of relief because I feel that in the work that I've done inside organizations, and I think since the inception of my career, I think it was part of my work here because I don't particularly recall any exampleship in my upbringing that made me think about this, but I did notice very early on the dynamic of leadership and team, and how that's all functioning towards a common goal, and how they all really, I felt like, want the same thing. They want to feel like they're making a difference. They want to feel like they're doing something meaningful with their life. They want to feel successful, but yet the day to day look very different. And then because of that disconnect often, and all of the talk and the mind chatter around that comes in with hierarchy and other dynamics, it's like, it doesn't sound like that. No one feels like that's what's true. Like they don't feel like they want the same things. And so it's always been really interesting to me, this paradigm, of leadership and all the roles that is, the inner leadership, the leadership of others, and then of course all the leadership that occurs inside the home. And we are, I think you can become a better leader, and I think you can learn skills of leadership, but I also don't think that it's like a special thing for only certain people. I think we're all leaders. It's just something that we activate. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
about that? And I'm curious if you're willing to share a little bit more about any of your case study or any of the, for anyone that might be listening that might be in this position right now and they're curious, well, more about what does that look like? And I'm even just curious, like, how does that connect back to healing? If you're willing to
Yeah.
ideate on that as well.
You know, inevitably, when people embark on this particular ascent, one of the great, wonderful awarenesses is even though they're a limitless creator, like the scale and the level at which they're going to be creating means that it really cannot be done alone. We need the interdependence of people around us to aid us in that. And it's not because there's something missing in the people. It's because just the level now, what the game they're playing, just the universe is just designed this way for some reason that we need to rely on the collaboration with others. And I think, that's where leadership comes in. And because of the nature of those things, what is learned also is that leadership, it would be counterproductive to the level we want to create if leadership was about being prescriptive to people about what to do.
Yes.
Because we're enlisting them because of their unique expression, what that's going to bring to the situation. So if we're a leader who believes great leadership is being prescriptive and telling people exactly what to do, it's like that's going to be a hindrance. But if we look at leadership as creating a space for people to live into their greatest self, the magic thing that happens then we get that greatest self to collaborate with us.
Yeah.
Whereas if we were being prescriptive, we would not be creating that space, and we'd be getting some dialed down version of what we really like are engaged with people for, right? So I think if we can think of leadership as, you know, modeling that liberation in us and then creating a space for people to live into their own liberation in that sense, then we're going to have like the maximum like wattage for what we're going to be creating. And that's where I think, really great leadership comes in. You ask as an example for some of this, and the one that comes to my mind is, and I can speak about this because he and I have done some podcasting and publishing about it, right? Otherwise, that relationship with our clients it's a sacred one, right? But I work with a gentleman named Sam Polk, who's the founder CEO of a company I know called Every Table, that their mission is that healthy food is a human right, and everyone, even challenged and marginalized neighborhoods and people, should have access to healthy food. So Sam's developed this incredible model that brings healthy meals to places that had been under the stranglehold of fast food and the health things that come about from that, right? So Sam, and this idea of the second ascent, Sam had an amazing first ascent in Wall Street. He was a hedge fund director, young age, just became a master of that universe. And in his book, he wrote about his experience called "For the Love of Money." He had a blowout because I think his bonus for the year was 3 million, and he thought it should be 10 million, and he had a and when he watched himself do that, there was a little bit of a something's off here, like that this is happening. And he went on a walkabout, ended up in South Central Los Angeles, and then woke up one day and said, it's about healthy food. And I bring it up because he had to move from the paradigm is about what I know and am good at, to no, the paradigm is about what my calling is, what brings me alive. And he had to choose in that moment, should I not do this? Like food, I don't know anything about food, but no, like by his own, accord, he said, no, like I can learn that. So Sam has done this incredible second ascent of creating this incredible company that's now expanded beyond California to the East Coast. And leadership for him is giving people in these neighborhoods access to also be managers and directors of these stores. And also, in addition to that, in terms of creating the space, to creating an educational program and a mentorship program that enables people in the neighborhoods to actually, own a store.
Wow.
To become a franchise owner of these stores, and so that there's a much bigger reciprocal socioeconomic shift that can occur, not just from healthy food, but economic futures, right? So
Yeah.
to me, that's such a prime example of this idea of leadership creates space. And it's Sam's doing that in his work and doing that in terms of like creating a space for healthy food in these neighborhoods, creating a space of work for people to be involved with something that's purposeful, and then space for even for people to help expand these things by having a sense of ownership in what's happening. It's just a prime example to me on all those different levels of what both the second ascent is and leadership really is in this world, or can be, I should say.
Right. And nor could he have ever predicted that that's what he would be doing when he was creating that first ascent and creating that powerful, lucrative, career on Wall Street, right? And
Yeah.
I mean
And I
that
want to, I think I want to underline that it's easy to get into the paradigm of the first ascent is wrong and the second ascent is right. And that's inaccurate. It's like, it's really important that, because Sam, me, you, we all have to have the experiences we have that enable us to even see what the second ascent is. It's kind of like if you and I are, getting across a river and we're hopping from rock to rock, and there's 20 rocks that go across the river. And if, we don't know what rock 10 is until we get to rock 9 or maybe rock 8, right? Now, when we move to jump to rock 9 or 10 from 8, does it make sense that we have to punish ourselves for
Mm.
like rock 8? That would be silly. Like, it served our growth and
Yes.
our journey in this. And so, I want to make sure that no one thinks, oh, like I'm in the first ascent and it's wrong. I got to get in the purpose and meaning. It's like, no, like it's not none of these are mistakes. They are important parts of this human experience that we're having.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful distinction. And how I think of it is it's all preparation. It's like every day is preparing us for the next. And I think what I appreciate about Sam's story is I don't think that unless you're doing work like this or you've already had this kind of transformation or liberation, that you may sound like, just, well, that sounds interesting, or that sounds like okay. But I think what I'm hearing and what you're sharing, that and also demonstrating through Sam's story, is that if you get to live long enough, all of these things are available, and it's all part of how we grow and learn. And even though Sam may not have ever been able to predict that this would be where his life would take him, it's almost like you can't get there until you get there, and all of what he went through, I'm sure, continues to support him in this role now.
Yes, absolutely. So much so. Like, we can take everything that all the learning we've ever accrued and still apply it to whatever it is that now is what brings us alive. We just don't have to be confined to what we're already good at or know. We don't have to be confined in that. And the ego mind likes to think we need to be confined to that. A few years ago, I got to do some work with Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. She's that famous Harvard neuroanatomist who had this big stroke on the left side of her brain and perceived the world from the right side, and the learning she developed from that. And she wrote a second book to that called Whole Brain Living, and she talks about, I thought that was fascinating, that the ego mind determines our safety through one metric, and that metric is familiarity.
Yes.
That is, if it's familiar, if I'm experiencing something that's familiar, then I'm safe. We're good. But if things start to be not familiar, oh, not safe. And I can understand this from an evolutionary point of view, in that, okay, I'm the cave person leaving my cave. I'm going out into the forest and to get food, perhaps. And if I'm walking in the forest that I've been to before, meaning I got to it and I managed to get home safely, right?
Yes.
The ego's going, oh, this is cool. Because the times when evolutionary we went into the part of the forest and got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, right? We never got home from, right?
Yes.
So hence familiar things are safe and unfamiliar things, be careful. And so this is similar. Like in our life, sometimes we can be stuck in the familiar. We think because it's familiar, because it's what we know and maybe are good at, that means that's what we're supposed to keep doing. But the truth is that that's just as much a reason to move on to something else because we're already kind of understand this and are good at it. It's like, so what might the next be? And the beautiful thing is we can still use all that knowledge. We just don't have to be confined by it in our choices of what we do in this life.
Yeah, I really appreciate like the power and how you shared that, and I think that that's a really easy way to relate to something I think we all can experientially relate to around familiarity, and that's probably obviously linked into that propensity to object or to want to slow down change, right? I'm
Yeah.
curious. Do you going to say something else?
Well, I think a good, quick little book that's helpful in this is Gay Hendrix's the Big Leap, right? Where the way they define this is there's the zone of excellence that we lift up into at some point in our life where we're really rocking this thing that we've gotten really good at it, we've learned it, and we're great at it. But that's actually not the last stage. The last stage is what they coin the term the zone of genius. And they don't mean genius in the sense of like I'm a savant at something.
Ah,
They mean it in terms of um, where we are really brought alive in the idea of it and thinking about it and considering it and moving into it, whether we actually know it well or not. That's not the important metric in that case. The important metric is how much are we just invigorated and excited and brought alive by it? Because if we have that, that can sustain any learning and beyond, right? So, and that's what we're all being beckoned towards. I think what Joseph Campbell talked about the hero's journey. I think it's the same thing of going off into the unfamiliar to come back again. Like really knowing like what brings us alive and who we are.
absolutely. I was thinking about, you know, any person that could be listening right now at all levels, and what would be your either advice or reflections if they're finding themselves hitting that dread, or I heard people talk about it like the Sunday scaries, or, I think that's something I've heard, but it's like, if that's something that somebody feels that they're experiencing inside themselves as it relates to their life or their work, what they're, and many of us, I'll just speak for what I've observed, and I would love for you to share your experience of this as well, maybe your own and anything that you've observed. The bigger our responsibility becomes inside of our life, whether that's other people we take care of, whether that's a family, and the bigger that life gets, the bigger the I feel like the oppression can feel of that, what can feel like a burden, and then people feel bad, and I think all of that can create a lot of story around that circumstance that then I think keeps people staying stuck, because it can, that whole, as I just described it, can feel very overwhelming. And I also think sometimes a lot of people feel or have felt that what you're talking about is a luxury, because this is, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but I feel like when you were describing that first ascent, that to me feels like a symptom of that idea, that that's where our life starts and stops. So I don't know if there's something there that you
Right.
heard. I would love to hear your thoughts on.
It's interesting. There can be different, what I'll call forcing functions for the initiation of looking at that second ascent, right? Like one can be where we get to the top of the first and we see, like we spoke about, like
Yeah.
there's still an opportunity for more and fine. But other times I notice that the forcing function can be these circumstances you're talking about, of circumstances of great overwhelm, great tragedy, great disruption of what is. And that, you know, it's easy in those circumstances to move into, like we all do, a sense of overwhelm and dread. And why is this happening to me? Right. And when that happens, we get into a mode of like, we circle the wagons, we get into what I'll call defense, which could be, again, evolutionary conditioning and so on. Right. And, and I would say, like, so many of my clients, like, their journey started with that. And then they began to, in a more of a sense of, this isn't working. There needs to be, like, I need to consider something different, right? Like they then take that leap of faith towards, even in those circumstances, towards what they start to love, and on a really good day, move from these circumstances are happening to me, to just play with the idea, run the thought experiment. I'm not trying to make a big philosophical statement about reality. I'm just saying a thought experiment of what if I move from this is happening to me to what if this is happening for me somehow? Like, even two doctors walking into my room and telling me I have terminal cancer and I have 18 to 36 months to live. What if I chose to look even that from the lens of, if this is happening for me, then what? And then to begin to look at possibilities that occur and dare to lean into them. Just dare to lean into them, dare to just lean into what's visible in the moment without needing to absolutely have an understanding of where it's going, but trusting that sense of aliveness when we give ourselves permission, even in those circumstances, to do it. Because I've seen again and again, I just think about, my example, when that happened to me, and I woke up at some point, and I was in the middle of my first year of college. I was a physics major. I thought, it was all about sciences, to then maybe go into engineering, maybe get a job. And then I was like, wait a second, if I only got 18 months to live, what, like, do I want to spend that time in a basement in Sharp Hall, the physics building, bombarding materials with particles, see what particles come out the other side? There's nothing wrong with that, but do I want to spend my life in the basement, what's left of it, or something else? And I just said, I got nothing to lose. I'm going to go do art. Like, I always liked art. I never thought there was any living in art, but I'm going to go do art. And I just leaned into it. And that led me to this really cool little program in my university called Visual Communications, which led me to this whole other thing I didn't even know existed, called designing and art direction, and then to concept, then to New York City, and to this, advertising in its prime. Got to meet my amazing, lovely wife, who's my wife to this day, 35 years later. And all that happened, from a forcing function of literally nothingness, like just 18 months to live. That's how it started. But I leaned into what brings me alive. And I see that again and again with many of my clients who start off with, like, I'll call it a downslope, what we might call that. But what I always recognize it is that it's no different from when the people get to that top of their first descent and say, well, it's the same basic thing of, like, circumstances are pointing me to, there's something bigger here. And am I going to give myself permission to trust the only compass that we're actually given, which is that sense of aliveness and excitement and enthusiasm for something, even if we don't even know exactly what it looks like? I did not, when I was that 18-year-old and, second semester, when I got that news, I didn't know that my just impromptu thing, I'm going to move towards art, was going to end up with me in a career as a creative director in advertising. having an amazing experience in that before I then said, okay, that phase is done. There's something next.
That is incredible. I just got chills. Like that is a profound and beautiful example of being willing to experience your life as this is happening for me. I mean, that really is because, I think the idea of
I have another client just popped into my head.
yes,
A, a woman named Marissa Hamamoto, who is the founder of a company called Infinite Flow. What Infinite Flow does is it gathers a collective of people who have various disabilities, and they come on and they do a dance show, a dance orchestration, modern dance, wheelchairs, crutches, everything else. And they come into corporations and they do this to free the minds of innovation of people within the company. Sure, they're demonstrating something about people with disabilities for sure, but they're also, when someone sees it and says, I could never have thought
yeah,
I would see a dance troupe of people in wheelchairs and amputations and so on, like maybe I should question everything I think is true. My role in this company, the products I'm making. Now, I bring this up because Marissa, had gone to school and everything to be a dancer. She had great promise as a dancer, and then one day she just collapsed and she had a stroke in her spinal cord, and it paralyzed her from the neck down for a period. She gradually got her motion back, but she was never going to be her goal at the time of being a career dancer, modern dancer. And where that led to her in not questioning still her drive for the power of movement, she calls it, the power, the freeing, the liberation of movement. She didn't let the go, but she saw, like, she kept leaning into it, and she saw the the intersection of the Venn between what brought her alive and what the world needs.
mm,
And the intersection of the Venn was to create this amazing dance troupe and dance company called Infinite Flow that now goes to, companies and schools and everywhere, and basically going back to where we started,
yeah,
liberates people from antiquated thinking about reality and what's possible for them.
that's
Talk
beautiful.
about starting from, you know, the forcing function of, I'm a dancer, but I'm in bed and I'm paralyzed from the neck down. I know I'm
Yeah,
never going to probably dance again.
yeah,
Now what? Now,
yeah.
now look what she's done.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. Yeah, those are two really powerful examples of what we're capable of, what's possible, and I think that those demonstrations, when we can experience them, especially though it sounds like the way she's doing it in that kind of 3D dimensional real time, can be really, really amazing and help us move out of this idea that we might be holding that's keeping us stuck.
And that bottom line is that circumstances are not an indicator of possibility. The only thing that determines possibility is really, and what we want to create is our willingness to have clear intentionality and take actions, even if it's just incremental, that towards it, that's what creates our reality, not current circumstances. That's an illusion that a lot of people buy into.
Yes, I think that more than a lot of people, because that's part of, that's the part of at least in my experience, the
Yeah.
human journey as we know it. And what we're talking about is also what's possible. And I so appreciate that. And you shared a couple of different things throughout our conversation, but I'm wondering as we're wrapping up, what if you were to share one idea, tip, or a practice even that could support somebody in taking some of what you have been sharing that you are doing with people that you are working with into their own life, just to play in that sandbox? What could that look like? What would that be?
Well, am I cheating if I just bring up two?
No,
Like,
please.
so like the first one, as soon as you said it came to my mind is kind of where I started in a way, freeing up, and where all my clients at some point we come across this, which is um, that our minds like to create polarities. It's either this or this. Like an example for me that I said was you either choose to make a good living
Ah,
or you choose this silly joy purpose thing over here, you know. And so creation came from me when I chose to transcend that polarity, when I chose to say, what if that's not true? What would it mean if that's not true? What would it look like if that's not true? Right. And I do this practice with my clients. Every week I have a session where a polarity comes up, and it's just, the ego mind lives in duality, right, wrong, good, bad, white, light, darkness, da, da, da. And, and really it's an illusion. There is no duality. Everything just is. And there are no hard and fast rules and like that. It's no, I found a way to live my purpose and make a good living and live where I want to. It's a design exercise, not a limitation, right? So I think that's one. Examine in your life where you're coming upon a polarity where you're finding you can't move forward because you're being forced to make a choice you don't want to have to make. Like, look at what the transcendent position might be from that, you know. And the other is, you know, something I brought up before. If you ever find yourself, and both of these things are things that happen to me every day where I do this, both the polarity and this, which is like, oh, life is happening to me.
yes.
Like, oh, damn, like, that's not fair. Life is happening to me, right? To create a practice where whenever that happens, to examine it and say, let me just play the game of, let's say, even this I say is happening for me. Let me just play in that little sandbox and see what happens. And invariably, what happens is we move from a place in our brain where neuroanatomically is about defense to curiosity. If I go to what's happening for me, then I get to be curious about, well, how could that be? And when I ask that question, I move into curiosity, and that's actually where we create possibilities. And that's where great things can happen, right? So those are just two little things that are just little tiny interventions that we can use on a day-to-day basis that can unlock and liberate like what's really the greatest possibility for us.
Oh, absolutely. And over time really become more of our default, right? Which is
Yes,
which is
exactly.
really powerful when you can be in that come from that place more on the regular. Well,
Yes.
in the essence of time, because I feel like I could ask you so many more questions, but the last thing I want to share as I wrap us or ask as I wrap us up is, when you were describing your clients, some of your clients that you work with, and even as I'm hearing you how you're working with these clients, it for me it kind of it nests back into this idea of like how healing and transformation or inner transformation liberation, how that in the microscopic impacts the macro, and how in the work that some of your clients are doing, how that is helping to support society and the consciousness. Well, I'm saying the consciousness of society because I think when people feel, I'm thinking about Sam Polk's example, when I think about someone in South LA having the opportunity to actually own a business when that has not been their experience, or nor did they ever think that was ever going to be a possibility, to then step into something like that, their life then takes on a whole completely different meaning, right? And or it can, and their expansion inside, to me, is an example of healing, is an example of consciousness, shifting. And I don't know, that might be a little abstract, but I'm just curious, how you
No.
think about your work in that regard, and does that something that you relate to?
Well, Jennifer, I think you're bringing up one of the biggest points here. I'm glad you're seeing it because I think I've missed it. Being clear about this, which is um, we think how transformation and change and all happens to us is we manage to change the outer circumstances of our lives, and then that creates like a new happy us. And that's actually not how it works. How it works is we change and shift what's inside of us, and that then in turn begins to generate an outer world that matches it. So instead of, and this is a principle I know instead of outer experience creates inner reality creates outer experience. That is, whether I want to look at it from an esoteric thing of like, that reality is designed that way. So when I shift in here, I begin to experience other things. That's fine. But I like to look at it just from a very practical point of view, which is when I shift something in here, for instance, that makes me, instead of in dread, I'm curious. I've learned something that when bad stuff happens, I get curious instead of dread. And then my curiosity actually creates new possibilities. And I act on those new possibilities and begin to create from those new possibilities. Then I eventually experience, and not even too eventually, sometimes very quickly, new exciting realities right there. So whether you look at it from the more esoteric place or just the very practical place, I don't care. It still works.
Yes.
It still works. And if we can understand that, oh, it starts with me, like whatever the changes that I really want to see in the world, to quote Gandhi, if I decide to be that change first, that's going to actually equip me to create that change. It's from that activism point of view that he's speaking about, or it's a business I want to create, or an organization I want to create, or a change in society I want to create. The principle still holds true. Like, start making the change in here, and then it will project itself in some way out in the world.
Yes. I feel like you have definitely shared a lot of really, tangible and examples, and how you express concepts I think were really relatable. And I so appreciate you and your time. And I hope that you'll come back and talk to me more, because I feel like your experience working with your clients has also, if I may, supported you in finding all kinds of ways to talk about these things to help people receive the insight. I think that the teacher in me is hearing that in you and appreciating that in you in this conversation. And I think sometimes that's really important to reach more people, is how it's expressed in a way that feels attainable. What you just shared now, the distinction between dread and curiosity and making that choice, that feels like, okay, I can wrap my head around that, and that accessibility is what excites me, because that's really a mission of mine, is to create experiences of accessibility for as many people as possible. So,
Well, and I see that, Jennifer, and I just want to state my appreciation of you. It's like we talked about, leadership is about creating space for liberation to occur. And like, I love that you've kind of dedicated your life to that, of creating spaces for people to do that, including this space right here, in this conversation that we're having. So just want to know I see you, and I really appreciate like the work you're doing, because at this time on the planet, it's really important work, I think. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for that. And real quick, please share with listeners where they can find you. And I'll obviously include it in the show notes, but I'd love for you to just share the best way to connect with you.
Well, you can find me, of course, on LinkedIn, and you can find my contact information on my website, kirksouder.co. And you can just email me, kirk@kirksouder.co. Pretty simple. It's all fine. Feel free to do that.
Okay. And just for those who happen to be listening and aren't looking at anything in print, but it's Kirk, Kirk, not Kurt, Kirk. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you. This has been amazing. And I look forward to future conversations.
I look forward to that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining me in this conversation with Kirk Souder. I hope something in this dialogue invited you to look at your own leadership, purpose, and impact in a new way. What really stood out for me was Kirk's reminder that real leadership is about creating space for others to discover their own freedom and possibility. It's about noticing the polarities in our work and our lives and learning to hold them with humility and curiosity. If this episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need it. Leave a review or subscribe so you don't miss future conversation. I really appreciate you. I'm so excited as I continue to build this conversation and this experience of hosting a podcast, and your engagement and contribution mean the world to me. Thank you for being here and for doing your part in this collective healing. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and don't forget to trust the wisdom of your inner voice.